Edenz Zero needs to change. The manga is entering its final stage, and at this point we already kinda know what to expect. There's gonna be more fights, more lore, and more timelines. Was definitely gonna say timelines. But beyond all that, there's obviously a lot that Mashima still needs to work on. Now that we're over 200 chapters in, we've pretty much seen what does work and what doesn't work. So as we shift gears into this next part of Edenz Zero, I want to take this opportunity to reflect on some of the stronger and weaker parts of the story so far, what people were excited about and what people didn't really like, and discuss how Mashima can improve and make this final part of the story the best it can be. And what better place to start off than with the most hyped up villain, Ziggy. When Ziggy finally died, I think that was the most requested video on my channel in a while. And part of the reason I want to talk about him right now is because Ziggy is a big part of the story. Not just plot-wise, but also with readers. This guy got a ton more hype than the other villains, and we had a ton of expectations, especially considering a lot of people thought he was going to be the endgame villain. So we have to ask ourselves, did he live up to our expectations? As I've said before, a great villain also needs to be a great character, and a great character needs to be fleshed out. They need to have a handful of characteristics so they feel like a real person. Ziggy had that. He had the backstory, he had the friendships, and he was a conflicted character. Ziggy was Shiki's grandpa, but he was also this badass villain. Now, that's one thing you can maybe say against Ziggy, that, oh, Ziggy wasn't really a great villain because he was just being controlled the whole time. Which is fair, considering I felt the same way about Cure, who, oh boy, I can't wait to talk about. But here, it's at least different. In fact, now's a good time to address something I saw on Twitter. I saw at least one person say that Ziggy isn't really a villain, he's just an antagonist. And while I get where people are coming from, this isn't true. A villain is like the big bad of an arc, whereas an antagonist is anyone who opposes the main character. For example, a lot of people like to say the same thing about Tsukasa from Dr. Stone. Tsukasa does bad things, but he's actually a good dude, so people go, oh, well, he's not a villain, he's just an antagonist. But the reality is that Tsukasa is a villain because he's the main antagonistic force in Dr. Stone. There would be no conflict without him, which is exactly what you have with Ziggy. If you take Ziggy out of everything after Belial Gourd, there would basically be no conflict. Ziggy, as we knew him, was a major threat and he played his role perfectly. So personally, I think he's the best villain in Edenz Zero so far. Yes, even better than Shura, and yes, even better than Draken Joe. Even with all of the controversy. I know people are iffy on the whole mind control thing, but I liked it. I think Pino finally having a major role was awesome, and this whole mystery has been a big reason for why I'm so invested in Edenz Zero. Even if he's not perfect, I think we all have to give Mashima credit for how he handled Ziggy. And on that note, I think we should also give him credit for how he handled Elsie and Justice. Or actually, not just them, but the OSI and the OSG. I think one thing we need to reconsider is how much planning goes into Edenz Zero. Don't get me wrong, it was clearly planned out more than Fairy Tail, and there's no way he could do all the Ziggy stuff and the Universe Zero stuff without a ton of planning in the beginning. But I think what's becoming clearer throughout the story is that a lot of this is more mixed than we think. Like, if we look at the OSI, who do we have? We got Cure, clearly not planned out. Dude got no time until the end, and suddenly he's the most important character in the story? Yeah, definitely not planned out. Then you have Feather and Eraser, who I both love, trust me, I want more of them, but definitely feels like Mashima just designed them and then started making it up as he went along. Then you have Jaguar, who's literally a meme, and then that just leaves Holy and Justice. Personally, I think Holy was planned out from the beginning. I'm like almost certain her backstory with Crow was foreshadowed. Hopefully my boy Edenz can help me out there. But either way, she is clearly the saving grace of the OSI, and personally, the best member so far. Now, when we look at the OSG, we get a similar story. It's this combination of characters like Draken Joe, who were clearly planned out, and then Acnella, who there's no way in hell she was planned out. At least not as much as she should have been. Then we get to Elsie and Justice, who I think best represent this because clearly there was a mix of planning and just making it up along the way. They got a lot of focus throughout the story, but obviously they both had their flaws. At least right now, I think Mashima did a good job with them. I think Elsie had a lot of expectations, sort of as the new Erza, but I like how her character came full circle. And Justice too. He obviously had his flaws early on, but I think Mashima did a nice job with the end of his character arc. So obviously, there was a lot with the OSI and OSG that people were disappointed about, but overall, I think Mashima did a decent job. Even though the OSG clearly got more attention, they both gave us a lot of great moments. But now that we've addressed the big complaints up until this point, we can start to list each of the changes that Mashima needs to make going forward. Actually, before I do that, make sure to like the video if you've been enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, admittedly, I have been pretty forgiving up until this point, but only because I think we should give credit where credit is due, especially when we're talking about Mashima and Edenz Zero. But it's exactly because we're talking about Mashima and Edenz Zero that now is the time to be critical. Now that we've seen a lot of how the story's unfolding, and we've seen what people like and don't like, here's what Mashima needs to do. First of all, he needs to flesh out the characters. Like I said before, part of my problem with Edenz Zero right now is that a lot of the side characters feel flat. They don't feel nearly as fleshed out as Shiki or Rebecca, or even someone like Wise. While it has been tolerable up until now, I think the difference between Edenz Zero being good and Edenz Zero being great will be how Mashima handles these characters. Because think about Rave Master, think about Fairy Tail. What do you always come back to? What do you miss the most? It's the characters. Say what you will about Hiro Mashima, but the dude makes great characters. At the pace we're going right now, I'm not sure if Edenz Zero is going to have the same kind of effect on people. It has a lot of great characters already, but characters like Jin, Laguna, and Clean just aren't living up to their potential. And what would suck is if they weren't fleshed out like they should be, or if there's some kind of big battle and they basically do nothing. Even if they're not big players in the final arc. If Mashima could just give them new character arcs and give me a reason to care about them like I did before, that would be fine. Part of the problem with characters like this is that Mashima only plans so much for them. A lot of the complaints with characters like Cure and Aknella and even Justice are generally the same. People feel like these characters should have had more time. So with whatever time he has left, Mashima needs to do more with these characters. And it's not necessarily the characters I named. You can say the same thing about Lobelia, Xenolith, or even Nox. But speaking of Nox, this is the other thing Mashima needs to do. When we look at this plot and what we have seen so far, obviously the key players going forward are Shiki and Rebecca. Now, up until this point, everyone has been pretty happy with the both of them. But look at what happened with Ziggy. It was the same thing. He was very important to the story, there was a lot of mystery surrounding him, and we all loved seeing that mystery unfold. But as soon as Mashima started to execute on it and started to explain things, that's when things got divisive. And again, this was because of a number of things. The explanation of Ziggy's backstory was a little on the short side, his fight was kinda quick, and people felt like there was his reveal and then suddenly he's gone. I think people would have been much happier if Mashima had just slowed down the pacing just a little bit to expand on things. And that is what needs to happen with Rebecca and Shiki. So with Rebecca, right? There is a lot that's gonna need to be explained, like her backstory, her powers, and then eventually her role in the universe. So far, Mashima has done a very good job with these things. He's eased us into her powers over time throughout each arc. Instead of info dumping us, he's peeled away one layer after another, and then learned something new only after we've really had time to understand it. That's why the reveals with Rebecca have always been received really well. So going forward, Mashima needs to continue to do this. He needs to draw out these kind of reveals so we can spend more time with them, because if he doesn't, it's gonna ruin this final arc. Either we'll be confused and not know what's going on, or it'll feel rushed and like Mashima is just dropping stuff so he can end the story. And on that note, here is what my concern is for Shiki. Generally, I would say the same thing for Shiki that I did about Rebecca. Just slow things down and make sure we take time to explain things. Especially with Shiki, considering he's got his powers, his role in the universe, his connection to Mother, all that stuff. But one thing I'm gonna caution, it's definitely not a problem right now, but I just want to put it out there. One thing Mashima needs to continue doing is having Shiki evolve. Part of Shiki's appeal is that he matures throughout this story, not just as a character, but as a leader. So my only real fear with Shiki is that he doesn't get any real growth in the next part of the story now that we're heavily focused on the plot. I think his character is great right now, but it'd be a shame if we didn't see any opportunities for him to grow like we did in Aoi War. Other than that, I'm pretty confident in the future of Edenz Zero. Obviously, everyone has mixed feelings about where we're at right now, but if Mashima can just execute on his planning and really give the characters their due diligence, then I'm sure Edenz Zero will turn out to be a truly iconic story. But now I want to hear what you guys think. What do you think Mashima needs to do differently? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you want my full thoughts on the side characters in Edenz 0, then make sure to check out that video I mentioned earlier. In that video, I explain why side characters are actually hurting Edenz 0. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.